Hola muchachos, ¿qué tal? Buenas tardes. Aquí tienen las instrucciones a tu tarea, guided workbook pages 137 and 138. Click there and you'll pull up a PDF version of the homework. And this homework refers to the regular verbs that are in the imperfect tense, which we covered this past class. And that can be found on page 194 of your textbook. We talked about how the imperfect is another way to talk about past actions, and compared to the preterite is what we use to talk about simple past actions, actions that we did just one time only in the past. We use the imperfect in contrast to talk about repeated actions, things that we did habitually in the past. In English, we say used to infer that it's an action that happens repeatedly. In Spanish, we don't have an expression that translates to used to. We conjugate those verbs in the imperfect to convey that meaning. Things that happened repeatedly in the past. So these are your endings for AR verbs: aba, abas, aba, abamos, and aban. And then ER and IR verbs sharing the same endings, and those are ia, ias, ia, iamos, and ian. Notice accents on each ending for ER and IR verbs. However, for AR verbs, only the nosotros form carries an accent. And then also the yo form and the ella forms are the same, right? The endings for the yo form and the ella usted form are the same for AR, ER, and IR verbs. So that's what we went over together. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the homework that you're doing, which again is going to be pages 137 and 138. So now that we're armed with all of that information and we know what we're using, we'll go ahead and go down here to part A. Pretty basic and straightforward. What you need to do for part A is to write the infinitive form of each conjugated verb. Infinitive form meaning dictionary version, right? You want to look up how to say something in Espanol and it's a verb. That verb is going to show up in the infinitive form in the dictionary. Hablar, comer, escribir, jugar, practicar, participar, comer, dormir. Those are all what? Infinitives. So that's the form you're going to want to use. Taking a look at the verb, the conjugation, take a look at the ending that it's using. Is it an AR ending like these first two? Or is it an ER, IR ending like 4, 5, and 6? 7 and 8, actually. 4 through 8 are all ER and IR verbs. And for these ones, well, how do I know? How do I know if it's an ER verb or an IR verb? Because as we looked at, whether it's ER or IR, they share the same endings. Well, you want to go to Spanish dictionary, right? And if you're not quite sure, you can't tell based on the stem, well, you can put it in to word reference or a Spanish dictionary and it'll tell you whether it's an ER and IR verb. So let's do the first 4 together, yeah? That's an AR ending, and we obviously recognize that as the verb jugar. This is the verb to bother. It's key vocabulary. And it is an AR verb as well. And coleccionar is an AR verb and also key vocabulary for this chapter. All of these are key vocabulary or relevant vocabulary for this chapter. Number 4, it's kind of a cognate. If you look at especially the prefix, you can tell that this is the verb to obey. And I know it's an ER or IR ending based on the ES ending, right? It's an ER or IR ending. But is it an ER verb or an IR verb? Well, you just got to play around a little bit. So we're going to take off the es ending, right? And we're going to put er instead. Let's see if obedecer, looks like it. Well, there you are. Obedecer is an er verb. If I put ir, I don't think that verb exists. Yeah, it'd probably correct you. So that's helpful, knowing that you can put it in the dictionary. That's part A. Part B, you're doing the opposite, right? You are providing the ending, the correct ending of just AR verbs according to your subject. Pretty straightforward. Choose the ending that matches the subject. For example, tú hablabas con mucha gente. You used to talk with a lot of people. Remember, the used to is kind of inferred. It's understood. It's included whenever you conjugate verbs in the imperfect tense. There's really no word or words that mean used to. This used to is inferred when you use the imperfect tense, when you have an imperfect tense ending. Let's do the first couple together. Alicia siempre blank a su hermana. Alicia always used to bother. Doesn't mean molest, all right? It's a false cognate in that regard. Bother, right, is molestar. How would we conjugate molestar if we're talking about Alicia? Which one of these endings would we use if we're talking about Alicia? Take a look at the example that's right up top here. Talking about Rafael, talking about him, and so that's how they got patinaba. You do the same thing for the verb molestar. If you're talking about Alicia, in this case it would be in the ella form. El meaning he, ella meaning she. So we're going to use that ending aba and add it here. Molestaba. Alicia siempre molestaba a su hermana. Número 2. Mis tíos nunca nos... And again, these are all AR verbs. Maybe you don't know the verb regalar. Look it up. The verb regalar is to give as a gift. But bottom line, we need to figure out the ending. And who are we talking about? We're talking about mis tíos, my aunt and uncle, or my aunts and uncles. It's a plural subject, yeah? Mis tíos. So we know our ending isn't going to be one of these three because those are for singular subjects, right? So we're going to pop on over to our plural side. We only have two options because vosotros is used predominantly in Spain, ¿cierto? So we have either nosotros or ellos, ellas, ustedes. And this is actually going to be the form because we're talking about them. We're not included. Nosotros is only if we're included in the group. So the ending aban is what we're going to use, and we get regalaban. Regalaban. Mis tíos nunca nos regalaban nada a nosotros. My aunts and uncles never used to give us anything to us. And maybe you were a little tripped out because you're like, what about nos? What about nosotros? How come that's not the subject? Well, these are the recipients, right? These are the people who are receiving the gift, or in this case, receiving nothing as a gift. But who's giving the gift? Who's the verb agent? It's mis tíos. Your subject's going to come right at the beginning, right? These are your subjects right at the beginning of the sentence. All right, video is getting a little long here. Let me share with you part C and D, and then we'll be done here. Part C, you're doing the same thing as part B. It's just that you're using ER and IR verbs. Let's do 1 and 2 together. Mis primos me blank sus bloques de vez en cuando. My cousins offered me, or used to offer me, their blocks once in a while. De vez en cuando. So our subject is mis primos. Those are my cousins. Ofrecer is our verb. That's to offer. It's a cognate. And this example is just like the one that we saw from part B, right? For mis tíos. We know mis primos is plural because it ends in S. And so for that reason, we know this left side is not going to give us our correct answer. These are all singular subjects, right? Yo, tú, él, ella, usted. Cierto? I, you, he, she, or you polite. Those are all singular, so we're going to move over here to the plural side. And our answer would be ellos. So we're talking about a group, in this case, my cousins, mis primos. So the correct answer there would be ofrecían. Ofrecían sus bloques de vez en cuando. And B, part 2 is going to have the same answer. But you can see your subject is also plural. A menudo mis tíos me permitían comer una galleta. Should say unas galletas. Same ending as number 1 because our subject is plural. And if you're looking at that me and you're like, well, why isn't this the yo form? It's just like what we saw here for number 4, right? Or forgive me, number 2. This is called an indirect object pronoun. It doesn't indicate the speaker, it indicates the recipient of the action. It's not the verb agent, it's not the subject, it's the recipient. So don't get that confused. In English, the recipient goes after the verb. In Spanish, it can do either. It can go before or after. In this case, it's actually coming before. So don't get confused by the me or the nos. Your subject is always going to come, or more often than not, going to come at the very beginning of the sentence. All right, so that's part C. Part D, last one. You're using the pictures here, and you also have the verb provided in parentheses to fully conjugate the verb in the imperfect. So Mario, él saltaba a la cuerda. Eso. Número 1, ellos coleccionaban. Ellos coleccionaban. I'm going to put aban here. Dinosaurios en la escuela primaria. 2, for those of you that are really locked in, is the only tricky one here. As you can see, there are 2 blanks here. The first blank should be filled with what's called a reflexive pronoun. You guys remember that from chapter 2a when you guys were doing your daily routine. So for number 2, make sure that you choose the correct reflexive pronoun according to your subject. And your options are me, te, se, nos, and se. So your first blank is going to be filled in with the reflexive pronoun. And your second blank is going to be filled in with the conjugation of the verb pelear. It's an AR verb. Take off your AR ending and then put the ending that would match the ellas form. And that is your homework, everybody. Sorry for the hella long video. Hopefully that covered all of the potential questions or concerns that you would have. Go ahead and submit that into Canvas as soon as you are able. And this really is my favorite verb tense of all the tenses. Favorite chapter of all the chapters. I think especially after coming out of the preterite, hopefully this feels a lot easier to digest than the preterite. So best of luck, everybody. Ciao.